Well, I just talked about moving to San Francisco, and I found out that San Francisco's weather is quite different from Long Beach's. I nearly froze the first year I lived there, but I did enjoy going to the church that I had been going to in Indianapolis. And interestingly enough, I told you that God arranges things. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. And guess what church my roommate that I moved in with, what church she went to? She was a Sunday school teacher in the same church my pastor and his wife were pastoring. So here I was back with my friends again. And of course, being an orphan and being able to reconnect with my father and mother in the church brought me back to the church, back to the Lord. And I don't say I lived a very good life then. But I wasn't much more knowledgeable of what God expects of people at that time. I didn't know as much about the scriptures as I thought I did, but I had a lot of learning to do. But that church was a real blessing to me, especially now I have the same pastor and his wife who had taken me under their wing when I was in Indianapolis. So things were going along quite well. I got involved in the choir. One of the students at the University of California, where I often worked in San Francisco, were members of our church. But I always tell people, this is the situation. There were men in the church. Some were married, some were too young, some were too old. So here I am, no prospects for marriage. But you know what? God has his ways. You're learning from my story that God takes care of us, and he was taking care of this old orphan. No mother, no father. Well, one brother in Long Beach, you remember. No brothers and sisters anymore. Just Dorothy, Robbins, and the Lord. But
except for it wasn't Dorothy Robbins then.
No, that's true. I wasn't. I was Dorothy.
It was Dorothy Paine. Dorothy Paine.
Oh, yes. I forgot to tell you about that. Well, I might as well stick it in here. My name was, at this time, Sarah Dorothy Bernice Elizabeth Paine. And every time I would go to a new school, and I went to a new school every year from the time I was in first grade. We moved that much. And every time I go to a new school, I didn't have any friends because I didn't know anybody. And the children made fun of me. And the children called me pain in the neck, and sometimes worse. So I got used to being called pain in the neck, pain in the head, pain anywhere. Children are cruel when they're young if you don't correct them. So anyway,
So you're back in San Francisco, and
in San Francisco I was still an orphan, but I had a family because I went to church. And like I said, some were too young, some were too old, and some were already taken. So I couldn't find a husband in that church, could I? Oh, ha, ha, ha. God has his ways. One of the members of that church was named David Kreiss. That's very important you keep that in mind, because one time we were getting ready for an outing. We were going either ice skating or roller skating, I can't remember which, but I didn't have a car, and David Kreiss was supposed to be taking me to the party, and so his wife called and said, "We're not able to pick you up, but we're sending someone to pick you up." Well, it happened to be a gentleman, and his name was Robert Kreiss. Robert Kreiss, that's a good name to remember. So Robert Kreiss picked me up and took me to the skating rink or whatever it was. And then we go out to eat, and we had hamburgers and apple pie. That's what we always did after we had an outing. Well, guess where Robert sat? Right next to Dorothy Paine. And Dorothy Paine was very nervous. I don't know why I was so nervous, but I couldn't eat my hamburger. So guess who I couldn't finish my hamburger. So I gave the half of it to the Robert Kreiss, who's sitting right next to me, you know. And so then we ate our apple pie. I don't know if we ate that or not. I can't remember. But he wasn't in church next Sunday. So what happened to Robert? Well, I was pretty upset. I said, well, I guess he's gone. Well, he wasn't gone. He had gone someplace to visit his sister. Robert Kreiss had a sister who lived in Berkeley, and he went to visit his sister in Berkeley. And guess what? He came back and got a job setting pins in a bowling alley, and he took me with him to watch him set pins in the bowling alley. Well, sometimes there were people there that bowled, and sometimes there weren't, but I would sit there and wait for him. But I was a nurse, I worked. So every day after work, I would go to the bowling alley and sit there and watch him set pins. Do you know what set pins mean? Well, maybe I better tell you. At that time, they didn't have a machine that set the pins automatically. They had a pin boy, and the pin boy picked up the pins really fast and put them back in the case and put them down, and then they were sitting there. Then they'd throw the ball, or they'd all fall down. He'd pick them up and put them back in for the next time. So that's what he was doing in the bowling alley. Well, one day he invited me to go to visit his sister. But I think it was before that he took me on a ride on a lake in the big park in San Francisco, and we went boating. That was very nice. So anyway, here we are. Do you think I was nervous going to visit his sister? Well, you can believe that. So I was nervous. But anyway, while we were there, Mr. Kreiss decided to teach me how to throw the bowling ball, because when there weren't any customers, I was able to play bowling at the bowling alley. And the one that ran the bowling alley was very nice, and he'd teach me a little bit here and there. So now Mr. Kreiss is going to teach me how to throw that ball. Hour after hour, down across the carpet would go a non-bowling alley, a non-bowl bowling ball. It was the plaything of my future sister-in-law. So the next day, you can believe that throwing that bowling ball across the floor was having its effect. I could hardly walk. I remember trying to walk up the ramps at the hospital. They didn't have stairways, they had ramps. And if you've ever tried to walk up a ramp with your legs aching, not very good. But I got over it. So anyway, Mr. Kreiss went to the church I went to, and of course it was very obvious something's going on between Mr. Kreiss and Miss Paine. And so two ladies offered me their wedding gown, and I'm pretty excited about this. And one evening after church, well, it was quite late in the evening because after church we'd get together in someone's house and we'd have a good time. We'd sing choruses and have refreshments and just talk to one another, and oh, we just had a wonderful time. And Mr. Kreiss would take me home. Well, this night he took me home and we sat out in the car and talked a while. In fact, we talked from the time we left the party till 1 o'clock in the morning, when Mr. Kreiss finally persuaded me we didn't need to have a wedding to get married. He wanted to go to Reno. Well, there went the wedding dresses. There went the wedding party. There went Dorothy to Reno and became Dorothy Elizabeth Paine Kreiss, after Mr. Kreiss's name. And that was the time that I married Robert Kreiss, who became the father of 8 children. How do you like that? An orphan now had a big family. Isn't God good? Isn't he good? And here I am sitting across from one of Robert Kreiss's wonderful young men.
So tell me about your trip back and how you revealed to people that you were married.
I'll have to tell you about the trip there. It costs money for gas to go to Reno, and we didn't have much money. He wasn't not working. He had planned to go to New York, and he was going to go and see the operas, but I guess marriage sounded better to him than operas, because we're on our way. We got in the car. Well, we were in the car. We drove to the biggest hotel in town, so we had one check to get money with, and he took it to the hotel hoping to cash it. Well, they wouldn't cash it, and the steps up to this hotel were huge. They reached a wide way, a whole block, and so you can imagine how high those were. And I'm looking up those steps because I'm at the bottom of the steps, looking up and waiting for him to come down with money to go get to Reno on. So as he's coming down the steps, he stoops, raises up, keeps on coming. And what in the world was he doing, stooping over, coming down the steps? Well, when he got in the car, guess what I found out? He'd found a $5 bill.
And that was enough to get you there and back?
And that was enough to get us there and back. That was a long time ago. 1945. You think back to 1945, it was a long, long time ago.
Just a second.
No. I forgot March. We're on our way to get married. Well, we got to Reno, but nothing was open. It was too early. All the offices were still closed, but eventually they opened. We went to the, what do you call them? I've forgotten what you call them.
Justice of the Peace.
Justice of Peace. And pretty soon I was Sarah Dorothy Bernice Elizabeth Paine Kreiss. Well, there's a lot of Kreisses around now, but there was only one Kreiss for me at that time. So we went home, and when we got close to San Francisco, my new husband, well, first I need to tell you his reaction to that wedding. we're driving along, and I didn't know what he was thinking. He's busy driving, you know. And pretty soon he says, I did it. I did it. What do you think he was talking about? Well, I know what he was talking about. He's talking about getting married. Well, I was married too. That means we were both married to each other. So we got home shortly. I got close to home, close to San Francisco, and Robert called the bowling alley and said he'd gotten married and he'd be late for work. And his boss says, oh, just take the evening off. So he took the evening off, and I had already been living in San Francisco for a couple of 3 years. I can't remember how long now. But I already had living quarters, which now became our living quarters instead of my living quarters. So Robert and I had gotten married. Well, it wasn't very long till somebody drove by the house, and Robert's car is parked out in front of my place. So we got a phone call. Well, actually, Robert got a phone call, and Robert's brother was on the line, and he says, what's going on here? So we had to go to David's house and tell him that we had gotten married. Well, no, that means no wedding, but it still means we're married. And, of course, right away, Joe Kreiss says, well, we're going to have a party, a shower for the new bride. I was very willing. And we set it up. And, of course, you know, wedding showers are attended by the ladies. The men may come, but not many of them, and I don't think any of them came. But anyway, the ladies in the church came, and I opened up lots of packages. But I had done something before we got there. I took our wedding certificate, and I decorated the picture frame, and I put the wedding certificate in there, a nice glass cover. And Joe Kreiss, that's David's wife, set it on the mantelpiece so everybody could see it. But she also put a shade in front of it. I don't think it's called a shade, but I can't think of the name of it. Put it so you couldn't see the fireplace. If you can't see the fireplace, you can't see the certificate. And in front of that, she put a table, and we put gifts on the table, and then pretty soon we put refreshments on the table, and we had refreshments. Well, one of the women, her name was Mama Millie. She was a German lady, and she did a very good job of speaking English. You could hear her, understand her very well, but it was a cute little way she had of saying it. Mama Millie wondered what that thing on the mantelpiece was. So she walked over to the fireplace and looked, and guess what she saw? Well, you know what she saw. She saw that certificate of marriage sitting there telling her that Robert Kreiss and Dorothy Paine had gotten married. And she says, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. So everybody wants to know, what does she not believe? Well, there was a lot of excitement there, of course, because it was Dorothy Robbins who had become Dorothy Kreiss, and Robert and Dorothy had become married. So now you know how I got married. Well, we didn't live in the rented room. Robert Kreiss decided we needed something better than just a room to live in. So he found an apartment on the 3rd floor of a San Francisco house, and we moved into the apartment.